is going on, all you wonderful A-plusers out there? It is I, Stuart Branscombe, here once again to give you guys another Kamen Riders Saber review. This time we're going to be talking about episode 16. If you guys recall, I was not quite the biggest fan of the previous week's episode, but I will admit that I might have been a little bit harsh on it. One thing that I kind of come to realize in retrospect when it comes to just kind of the Kamen Rider seasons that I've seen is that villain motivations is never really a strong point when it comes to the Kamen Rider series, if I'm being honest, altogether. Like, for Ryuki and for X8 and for 01, there was never really a point where I was like ever sympathetic towards the villains or ever thought, oh, this villain's motive definitely makes sense when you look at it in their point of view. It's never been that. So I think the idea of me kind of getting really upset about the villain's reasons for betraying the other riders, I guess it just kind of came to the fact that I really thought this was going to be slightly different from all the buildup that we had been getting from it. But, you know, I was wrong, and I do think that in retrospect, I shouldn't have been that hard on it. Like, I do stand by that it was still a really bad episode. I just don't think it was as bad as I put it. But with that being said, let's talk about this new episode and see if it definitely changes my mind about this previous one, or if it's about on the same level. So let's start with the beginning of the episode, which I don't know if it was just me or if anyone else kind of got this vibe, but to me, it really felt like the beginning of the episode was setting up a new season. Like, if it wasn't for the fact that every Kamen Rider series is basically just a one-season show, I would have walked into this assuming this was the beginning of season 2 of Kamen Rider Saber, because it really feels like a lot of points from the previous arc were wrapped up, but with just a few lingering things to keep it going for another season and to set up a whole new storyline. And that's what it really feels like they're kind of doing now. Now we got Rika, who believes that Touma is the key to fighting something known as the Sword of Light, which in turn is supposed to lead her to the Sword of Darkness. This storyline is funny to me because it reminds me of one of my favorite video games of all time called Shining Force, a game where you have to find a Sword of Light and the Sword of Darkness, and then you combine the two so they become the Chaos Sword. Seriously, if that happens in this show, I'm gonna get so excited. I really hope it does. Fingers crossed for the Sword of Chaos. So, the very next scene, we get our group kind of recuperating about everything, wondering where Sophia went, and then also just kind of talking about how it's just been a rough year for every single one of them. A bit of meta dialogue that at least I think it was supposed to be meta. Whether or not it was, it definitely holds true in the real world, whether or not it was meant to, because yes, 2020 has been a very stressful year. But the group decides that what they all need is a really small social gathering to celebrate the holidays, so a lot of the writers kind of just go off to do some shopping while Touma kind of stays behind to continue writing his book. And he also doesn't tell his friends about Calibur's motivation. He essentially doesn't tell them that Calibur warned Touma about there being a traitor within the Wonder Ride group, which to an extent kind of makes sense. I mean, again, Touma is very new to this group, whereas the group has been with the Wonder Ride gang for so long. You know, in fact, you even get Rintaro, who was literally born into the Wonder Ride gang. This was his family. So the idea of breaking it to them that there's a chance that there could be a traitor, I could see why he was kind of hesitant to bring that up at first. Meanwhile, another connection between the two worlds has opened up, but for some reason, only very few select people are able to see it. We don't know why this is yet, and one of those people is Mei's boss from her job working at a publishing company, which also I gotta say that was kind of interesting to finally see play out in an episode. Like, we see her at her job in the opening theme song all the time, not to mention she talks about it all the time as well. But this is the first time we actually get to see her in a workplace environment, at least as far as I can remember. Definitely correct me if I'm wrong there in the comments below. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Touma is later approached by Rika, who offers him a job to work with the south base of the Sword of Logos, but he of course turns it down because Touma feels more comfortable working closely with his friends. Plus, knowing that there might be a traitor on board, I feel like going to a completely new group of the Sword of Logos would definitely not be the smartest genius move on his part. We then get a really nice relaxing moment between Touma and Mei that really kind of felt like an old school Kamen Rider season. It's not really interrupted by any action or anything like that, it's just the two of them sitting down and talking. I actually have been really liking when the show has done this before. We had a scene like this a couple episodes ago, and again, it has been kind of the highlight of the entire series. I like that we can have these fun goofball characters that aren't afraid to crack a joke here and there, but we can also have scenes with these characters where they're just having a friendly, normal conversation. I actually am kind of hoping that a romance might be brewing between Touma and Mei, but I'm not gonna quite cross my fingers yet. Meanwhile though, after failing to recruit Touma, Rika convinces the other riders that Touma will inevitably betray them. This comes from the idea that Touma entered this other world where he got his hands on such a unique power, and her ideology is the fact that both Daishi and the previous Caliber had both had their hands on that power, and that's what corrupted them. So she tries to convince the other riders that this is what's going to happen to Touma as well if they don't do something to stop him now. The team confronts Touma about this, and they talk for maybe 30 seconds until everything just turns into a brawl. While the fight is really good, it's really hard for me to engage in it because the reason for them fighting is just so forced. It's just due to a lack of communication and urgency. Let me elaborate on that. Oftentimes in a lot of superhero shows, you will get things where superheroes will have to fight each other. Sometimes it's because they disagree on how they should go about saving the world, or other times it's because of a lack of communication. This is really hard to write because a lot of times you gotta come up with a really good reason for why two characters would hate each other. A good example, even though it's one of the most overrated comic books to my opinion, definitely comes from The Dark Knight Returns. While, again, I find that comic book to be super overrated, I can't deny that it totally makes sense within the context of that comic book why Batman and Superman have their discourse. They have two completely different ideologies about the world. Superman truly believes in standing with the US government, and Batman thinks that the US government is part of the problem. There's also a way that you can still have superheroes fight each other and not have it be because they disagree. This often comes from miscommunication, which is really difficult to write because most superhero friends specifically, communicate with each other, and therefore it's very rare that you get a superhero that'll just fight the other superhero without talking it out. The way you usually write around this is with urgency. Sometimes there's a very time limit situation going on and there's no time to talk about it. This was very well done in Captain America Civil War. Iron Man's trying to take in Captain America for breaking the law, but Captain America doesn't have time to explain to Iron Man that it's because there's a group of Winter Soldiers out there that could turn at any moment and, essentially be unleashed around the entire world. Another great example comes from Justice League Unlimited. Superman is trying to destroy what he believes is a bomb, and Shazam is trying to stop it because as far as he knows, it's not a bomb, it's a countdown that's supposed to give the city very clean energy. Things like this is what makes watching superheroes fight each other not only enjoyable, but also really intense too, because you don't know who to root for. There's no good or bad side. Each superhero just has their own ideologies on what's right and what's wrong. That wasn't the case in this fight. In this fight, Touma believes that there's a traitor amongst the Sword of Logos, and the other riders don't bother talking to him about this. There's a few lines of dialogue while they're fighting where they try to say, "How could you believe such a monster like him?" But there isn't really a discussion though. This whole thing could have been easily avoided had the characters had just a few more minutes to communicate, or better yet, if there was any kind of urgency. If there was something like Touma had to do something but he couldn't explain to the other riders why he had to do it, and this thing that he had to do looked very suspicious. And on top of that, you add a time crunch to the whole thing. Something like that to really make us feel like, oh, it makes sense for our characters to be fighting each other. But we didn't get that in this episode. What we got were a group of friends that failed to talk to each other, and it led to an all-out brawl. And unfortunately, this type of writing just makes me not care about a good fight scene. And this fight scene was really good, which is why it made me so sad that I couldn't enjoy it all the way through. As the fight's about to come to an end, Touma is suddenly rescued by the Sword of Light, who essentially takes down all the other riders, which causes the other riders to retreat. And yes, you heard me, he was rescued by a sword, specifically by the mysterious man who wears like a white cloak the entire time, that we have seen a few times, but he hasn't really had any lines. We do find out in this episode though that he is Yuri, and that he is essentially the Sword of Light. We also know that he has met Touma before, but essentially besides that, that's pretty much most of what we get from him. I do find it interesting though, because we have seen this guy interact with the narrator of the show, and early on when I started reviewing Kamen Riders Saber, one of my theories was that the narrator may actually be a character within the show and not just a narrator for the audience. I'm very curious to see if Yuri brings this up with Touma, and then we might finally get that answer as to whether or not the narrator is diegenic or if he just exists in his own world or something like that. It is definitely interesting in that aspect, but yeah, unfortunately, while I did love the first half of this episode, I do feel like the overall fight and the reason we got to the fight at the very end of the episode was quite pointless. And I think another part of it is that it comes down to when it happens. I feel like something like this should have been happening sometime later on in the series, like episode 35 or episode 40, somewhere near the point where we actually think this could be where the rest of the series goes. But because it happened so early on, it's kind of obvious that within the next 4 or 5 episodes, Touma and his friends will all, make up and they'll be best friends once again, and they'll pretend this whole dispute between them never even happened. I don't know. I wish I could have enjoyed this fight more, and there were a few small tweaks that they could have made to make it actually make sense, but unfortunately, I feel like they just wanted to have superheroes fighting each other, and they didn't really care enough about explaining what made them fight. They just thought, oh, simple miscommunication, whatever, that's what causes them to fight. But guys, at the end of the day, those are just my A+ opinions. We here at A+ Opinions always want to know what you guys think, so definitely let me know in the comments below if you agree. Maybe you actually thought the fight between the riders actually made sense to you, and that's totally fine. Definitely let me know, and also let me know why. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget, if you like the content that we provide for you at A+ Opinions, definitely hit that notification bell and you will be notified when we drop new content. But guys, above all, just remember, keep it A+.